and welcome. I'm Steve Clements, editor-at-large of The Hill. Thanks for joining us for our second session of our timely and important discussion of the future of education. During this hour, we're going to take a virtual plunge into how technology and new ways of thinking about how and where we can learn are shifting the education landscape. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Nokia and the American Federation of Teachers, for their support of today's conversations. As schools begin to reopen across the country, how will the past year of digital learning impact the classrooms of the future? How can technology be leveraged in a way that is equitable and successful for the generations of students yet ahead? We're going to be hearing from tech experts, state and federal policymakers, school leaders, and more. But before we get underway, you can tweet us at The Hill Events, at the hashtag TheHillEd, The Hill ED. We're broadcasting live and we'll be taking your questions throughout the program. They've been some great questions. And with any live stream, you could experience occasional trouble. Just push refresh. I hear it will hopefully help you. It never helps me, but I always find that line the funniest of the things I have to say. But good luck with it. My first guest of this hour is the acting chairwoman of the Federal Communications Commission. I've already been talking about her today and her role in the E-rate program and connecting lots of students in lots of different ways to high-speed internet and digital learning. Jessica Rosenworcel has been focused on eliminating the homework gap during her time at the FCC. Recently, the FCC approved the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program and created a broadband data task force to take steps towards this goal. We look forward to speaking to her about what else is on her dashboard for the future. Acting Chairwoman Rosenworcel, it's great to see you. Let me just start out. You've got your new role, your new job. Let me just be facetious. What have you done for children lately?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. As you know, I care deeply about us as a nation solving our digital divide. And it's especially important to me that we leave no child offline. And during this pandemic, so many students have been shut out of the virtual classroom. I have been talking for a long time about how we need to do something about it. And I'm really proud that the FCC has already taken steps with the emergency broadband benefit to help low-income households, including those with students, get online. And we've got more good stuff to come with an update to the E-rate program next.
Recently, Jessica, I interviewed John Stankey, the CEO of AT&T, and he said maybe we needed to think differently about how, things like Lifeline, we need to think differently about how we reach students, how we do some of the things we're doing. Maybe we ought to be issuing, debit cards or try to, provide benefits in other ways. Is any of that kind of in the sandbox of the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, looking at what we've learned from SNAP and sort of food support programs and saying, when it comes to digital lifelines and digital connection and children and education, there are a lot of innovative things we can do?
That's a really good point. And I think the emergency broadband benefit is really built on that idea. We traditionally talk about the digital divide, and we suggest that we're going to have to work on connecting rural communities. And that's the only thing we talk about. But we've got this bigger problem, which is affordability. And it affects households in rural and urban America and everything in between. So what we need to do is come up with programs that help households that are struggling with paying rent, paying for groceries, keep their internet bill so they can stay online for work, for school, for healthcare, and more. And the emergency broadband benefit that the FCC just established is the nation's largest ever affordability program. It'll help low-income households get a $50 discount on their monthly service, and there's an additional discount for the purchase of a computer or a tablet. This is good news.
I know, I don't know how to put this, but I know you love all your children equally out there. But as we look at areas of the country that have been challenged, particularly with marginalized communities, are there one of the things I like to do with these shows is sort of do show and tell. Are there places that we can look at how they were able to kind of move towards a more inclusive, digitally connected, educational environment where real progress was made that others could learn from? Does anything stand out when you look across the country of those kind of opportunities that said, wow, we really did succeed there, let's do that again over here?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. We're in a crisis right now. We are dealing with a pandemic. Students have been outside of the classroom. They've been asked to go to school online. And we've got educators across the country, coming up with every innovative solution they can muster to solve this problem. And I'm absolutely convinced as we emerge from this pandemic, we should study the efforts of educators nationwide. We're going to learn some things in Washington. There are going to be some good ideas out there that we can work with on scale. We're seeing schools loan out wireless hotspots so students can stay online. We're seeing major cities blanket the student community with broadband and help get them connected at home. We're seeing very creative wireless policies where wireless signals are beamed out from the school to the students' households so they too can stay online for class and do their nightly homework. I think all of these things are going to be part of our connection for students in the future. It's all part of how we solve the homework gap. And right now with the American Rescue Plan, which may soon become law, we're going to have an additional $7 billion for the FCC's E-rate program. And we can explore all of those solutions and then start funding them at scale nationwide.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the E-rate program and the American Rescue Plan. And, I just come to you that, you're going to spend some time with President Biden. You already have in the past. I'd like to get a sense on how to ask an unfair question here. Let me, do they get it? I mean, the president has so many different challenges right now across the board. I think it's always interesting when it comes to education, it comes to the homework gap, and it comes to this generation of children that have been impacted by this pandemic. I guess I would ask you how serious, I know it's high for you. Do you think it's a high enough priority for other members of the Biden administration as they contend with other challenges at the moment?
Well, obviously there's a lot of attention being paid to shots in the arm, a lot of attention being paid to shots to our economy so we can all get back to work. But I think the issue of getting every child connected, solving the homework gap, it looms large because we've now got this emergency broadband benefit in place, and Congress is going to help us, hopefully in short order, update the E-rate program with an additional $7 billion to solve the homework gap. This is more attention to affordability, the digital divide, and the homework gap than we've seen in years. And so we're going to come out of this pandemic. And I think Washington and communities nationwide understand like never before, we've got to get every household connected everywhere for students and everyone else who resides in those houses, those homes.
Let me ask you a question. Shortly I'm going to be talking to the governor of Missouri, Mike Parson. I had President of the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten, earlier. I'm going to have Brian Hendricks on in a moment from Nokia. So we got a governor, we got the teachers, we got, companies. I'd like to hear, just forget your FCC hat for a minute and just let loose. What can each of them do in public-private partnerships? What can each of us, in this contract of how we get this right, what can everybody do a little bit better? What do they need to hear? What would you like to hear from them to help the FCC's work improve?
Two things. First, I'd like every local and state official to help size the homework gap. How many students in what communities don't have internet access at home and just can't do their nightly schoolwork? These are the kids sitting in the parking lot after school to get the Wi-Fi signal or outside of the fast food restaurant to go online for class. If we had a better map of where those students are, we would do a better job of solving this problem. And then when it comes to technology, I don't think this is a one-size-fits-all solution. As I mentioned before, we can loan out wireless hotspots from our schools, but we can also do creative things with wireless signals. We might be able to use some new spectrum bands with unlicensed airwaves for all sorts of new solutions that could help us in some of our smaller communities. And I'm excited to learn what's working in the states and our communities, because let's see if we can do it en masse and do it in more places.
That's cool. Are you excited about the agenda ahead?
I am. Listen, this pandemic has revealed a hard truth. Our nation's digital divide is very real. It's very big, but it has also energized us to fix it, close it, and solve it. And I am an optimist. We're going to take all that energy and do some good things.
And Jess, before you go, let me ask you a question. I don't even know anywhere near the answer, but I used to work on spectrum issues like 30 years ago or 20 years ago. So I don't know. I mean, does in the area we're talking about, is there enough spectrum? Is the Pentagon sitting on too much spectrum? What's going on with spectrum innovation? I know that this is probably a landmine I shouldn't open up. But I mean, my question is, as you look forward, you help govern that space. Does everybody have what they need when it comes to giving, schools and corporations the right amount of spectrum, which is a limited resource as I understand it?
Yeah, this is a big question. But what's also apparent is that our wireless future is really big. We're all doing more wirelessly than we ever have before. But one of the hard truths of science is that our airwaves are finite. We're not making more of them. So we're going to have to get more creative and more innovative in the United States when it comes to using our airwaves so that everyone from the commercial to civic sector has the access they need for the connectivity that we're going to see in our 5G future.
Well, Jessica Rosenworcel, acting chairwoman of the Federal Communications Commission, we've had this is probably our 20th or 30th discussion on these issues.
I know.
I admire very much your passion on this, and one of the things I'll just tell my audience is, from when I knew you when you worked with Senator Rockefeller years ago, and you were kind of working on how do we shape E-rate. E-rate's gone through so many different evolutions, and it continues to, and I just want to, tip my hat. I'm on the opinion side of our operation, so I can do that. I just want to say thanks because I know it is the driving passion for Jessica Rosenworcel. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And now it's time for the sponsor perspective portion of our program. Before we get going, it's a quick clarification. While I'm conducting the interview and these questions are really mine, content of this portion shouldn't be considered classically editorial. With that, I'm pleased to welcome my friend Brian Hendricks, Vice President of Policy and Government Relations at Nokia Americas. Brian, you heard me. I was just talking about you, as well as the governor of Missouri, talking about teachers. And as we look at this sandbox, excuse the pun, of getting digital connectivity right in this country, and also with, particular focus on educating children, connecting schools and kids wherever they may be. I'd like to know from you what you think our biggest blind spots in this conversation are that we've got to confront.
Well, first, thanks for having me back, Steve, and congratulations on another incredible forum and event. Happy to follow my friend, Chairwoman Rosenworcel. She and I have been confronting these issues way back to our time in the Senate. There are blind spots, and I think she noted a couple actually for you there about sizing the homework gap. But it isn't just a homework gap, it's a coverage gap generally. We still have very poor information about where the networks are actually available, where they're not yet available. There's already been an effort to improve the quality and accuracy of broadband mapping. That'll help. In the interim, the school districts, as an example, which is a big focus of your topic here today, do have a lot of very good information on the connectivity of their students and their families. So we certainly should and can leverage that information. So we have to know where the networks are and aren't operative. And then the second thing we still know very little about is what are the drivers of the affordability crisis? Because it isn't just the cost of the services. It's often, as the chairwoman noted, the cost of the devices to fully leverage the services. So we need to closer analysis about the affordability issues, the availability issues as well.
One of the other dimensions that I've been fascinated by this time we've been in is, whether a bank shot possibilities. And what I mean by, tell the audience what I mean by bank shots. Sometimes we pursue policy very earnestly. There's a challenge. Let's get our act together. Let's go after it. But, I'm interested in, connectivity in healthcare, for instance, with telehealth, the massive expansion of online medical consultations, whatever. I'm just wondering if that's sort of a bank shot that sometimes, when you see the demand rise for connectivity for health, that can have a potential impact on education. Am I wrong in that, or is that an opportunity, a bank shot opportunity, to help address educational connectivity?
It certainly is an opportunity, and I'll go a step further. As technologists, companies like Nokia, we often make forecasts and projections about how the technology in a particular generation is going to change, what it might enable, what the winning use cases are likely to look like, and we're usually wrong. We usually undersell what's going to happen. One of the, I don't want to say it's an upshot, but one of the positive things that can be taken out of what we've learned from the pandemic is that we were thrust, not a little at a time, but entirely all at one time, into the use of broadband connectivity as our delivery platform for rural healthcare delivery, diagnostic medicine, online learning, et cetera. So it's showing cracks in the system in terms of coverage and capability that might have taken us a very long time to discover if we hadn't. And if we're smart about this, particularly in the area of education, if we invest in cultivating, applications that make online teaching easier for both the student and the teachers, in terms of healthcare, in order to improve the quality of diagnostic medicine, if it has to be done remotely, what are the network needs? Is the throughput and the latency sufficient so that we can actually do this? We can model now a world where we're going to transform and digitalize a lot of our activities of daily life. We assumed that would come from the improvements in our existing technologies, and certainly as a key driver from 5G. We speculated about it, but we're actually seeing in real time what that would look like. And we're seeing some spots that we're not prepared for, and that can be beneficial to us.
Brian, I'm probably going to get in trouble with this question, but years ago I interviewed a Nobel laureate, a fascinating guy named Arno Penzias. He was at Lucent Technologies, but a very famous and a very blunt dude. And he said, when it came to the internet, he was famous for saying the internet was going to make smart people smarter and dumb people dumber. It was going to create this line. But I mean, I'm sort of interested in, when we talk about the digital divide and the jump to 5G, these massive structural seismic shifts in opportunity and connectivity, that if you're in that turbo flow, you're going to have a very different world. And if you're not, it's going to be a radically different, a huge distance. And I'm just wondering, are the stakes of this conversation, understood to be as high as I think they are?
I don't think they're understood to be as high as they really are, quite honestly. And, Nokia is a supporter and a fan of an update to the National Broadband Plan that was put together about 11 years ago. It was done by the National Urban League. It's called the Latimer Report. It should be required reading for pretty much every elected policymaker. We certainly support its findings, but I think one of the things that it's done that maybe past efforts hadn't, that focused just on availability of the physical network and the affordability of the services or the devices. And it goes on to talk about, well, what will be delivered and where are the opportunities and what's the impact on equity and inclusion agendas if we're right about the transformation of society and you don't have a connection. It used to be inconvenient and it used to be frustrating to not have a broadband connection in 2018 and 2019. But for your needs, you could go to a library or a school where we had done a pretty decent job of wiring things. But as we're seeing in the pandemic now, occasional access to broadband is no longer a luxury. It's a requirement of daily life. And we're not going to be able to do that simply by wiring anchor institutions. We're going to need individual connections because the flow of content, the flow of services, access to digital skills training, education, content, enrichment materials for students, these things are going to require a broadband connection. So that not only if we get this wrong, when we roll out this next generation of technology, not only will we make permanent the digital divide, we will turn it into a chasm, and it'll be fairly catastrophic for any serious hope for equity and inclusion.
Brian, I want to ask you, you and I haven't talked about this, but in the arena of deploying 5G and this next generation, the strategic leap in communications, data, sensors, all the stuff that you need to bring in to the environments that we're going to have, particularly in urban areas, but also non-urban areas. What should we in communities and state government, I'm going to be talking to Governor Missouri in a minute, what do we need to understand that we don't get about this new infrastructure that's coming, about the stakes of it? Because I already know, talking to other players in the 5G space, that the rollout is complicated, right? The level of infrastructure, retrofitting is complicated. So I'd just love to hear from your perspective, the Brian Hendricks, you can take Nokia hat off if you want, but what do we need to do to get this transition right and healthy, make it inclusive, make it, the kind of jump forward we all want?
Well, certainly it's going to require a lot more cooperation and collaboration and less combativeness. We have had a lengthy set of proceedings about siting issues and states and localities and the need to expedite those processes to make it easier. I think industry needs to frankly do more to find ways to cooperate and collaborate with cities instead of arguing and looking for preemption and things of that nature, because this isn't a one-time rollout. This is going to be an evolving situation. We're going to need access to more and more types of infrastructure. I think the second thing that we have to focus on is we anticipate there'll be a massive infrastructure bill or debate in Congress this spring. Past efforts at infrastructure have focused on things like roads and bridges and shovel-ready jobs, which is great, but they haven't always included the forward-thinking what I call smart policies, things like dig once to make sure as you lay highway, you're putting conduits so you can pull fiber through without having to tear up a highway. If you're going to build new bridges, if you're going to build new rail infrastructure, putting sensors in place and putting attachment points for micro infrastructure. So plan for a continued evolution and need for siting as these things go. And then I think, Chairwoman Rosenworcel has had her finger on a number of problems. She's been very forward thinking about the need to simply reform a lot of the programs that we have at the state and federal level, which are artifacts of prior generations of technology deployment. Not all partnerships, not all products, not all technologies are eligible for support of some of these programs. And it really does need to be an all hands-on exercise. We shouldn't be picking technologies. We should set what the requirements and the needs are aspirationally, and we should invite all participants, all providers, all products to the table. And then we need to modify and reimagine how we support those things to encourage, lower cost, more efficient deployments that are more sustainable. And I would say the other thing, there's great opportunity with 5G in particular. Part of the transformation that I'm talking about is building a more sustainable society. The technologies and the decision to use sensor capabilities and precision farming, intelligent manufacturing, smart logistics, smart sewer and municipal infrastructure, they're not always the sexiest issues. When you think about the savings to cities and states in terms of not having to roll guys with a truck to bang on a pipe with a wrench to find out where the problem is because you've got smart infrastructure, there are ways that we can be much more efficient in moving people and water and resources around, which, the sustainability agenda is a big one too that we should be paying a lot of attention to. So those are just some of the pieces, but we have to reimagine and not show fealty to all of our processes and policies of the past. We have to update them for the needs of today.
Well, I know we've got the governor online, Brian, but I want to squeeze in one quick question to you. I know that you think we need to connect every home in America. We need to connect. We showed that just connecting libraries and schools and McDonald's isn't enough. We need to go over. What's the price tag for that? What do we need to actually think about in terms of getting that element right? What's the price tag the country needs to consider?
Well, it's very hard to put that in perspective. Let's just assume for a moment we don't make the changes that I'm talking about. We keep the existing programs that we have, which we think overly constrain the solution set, so that we could talk, if we had more time, about some of the private networks we're launching right now for school districts to connect their students. None of those projects are eligible for federal funding right now because we're not eligible telecommunications carriers. So if you don't make all technologies and all products eligible for the programs, then what you're locking into is a smaller subset of possibilities. And those are often going to be the really expensive ones. A fiber to every home is going to be very expensive to do. And it may not be necessary to deliver the kinds of capabilities that we're talking about. It may make a lot of sense in certain places and you can get a lot of yield from it, but it may not make sense in other places. And we have to make sure that we reimagine things. And we've also seen that we've spent something close to $80 billion, I think the figure is, between the last 5 and 7 years. And we haven't gotten the greatest yield, Steve, off of the connectivity. And we're seeing that you still have 30, 40 million people unconnected. So if we don't change things, is it outlandish to say we will need more than $100 billion to finish the job? No, that's not outlandish at all.
Wow.
But if we make some of these smart changes, we can bring that cost down and make the resources go farther.
Brian, do you do a lot of business in Missouri?
Oh, I'm sure we do. I don't have the exact figures. I know we're talking to some of the schools in Missouri, some of the larger districts and some of the more rural ones about the possibility of doing some of these private network solutions to connect the students.
Well, good.
And
well,
families.
We're going to jump from you to the governor of Missouri. You can consider yourselves introduced. But Brian Hendricks, Vice President of Policy and Government at Nokia Americas, I really appreciate. Every time we have a conversation, I learn a ton, and so I'm really grateful for your support of the conversations. But I'm more thankful for having a kind of high-octane discussion on these important issues. Thanks, as always, for joining us.
All right. Thanks again, and congratulations, Steve.
My next guest is the 57th governor of Missouri. We just saw him on the screen, Mike Parson. He currently co-chairs the Community Renewal Task Force at the National Governors Association, which has jurisdiction over a broad range of issue areas, including education. Governor Parson, great to see you. I just kind of connected you to my friend Brian Hendricks of Nokia. We're just sort of talking about not just education, but all of the kind of, broad elements in the sandbox, if you will, and why this is such a vital conversation, as we are deep into a pandemic, hopefully coming out. I just want to I'm now following you on Twitter, but you have, you just said all K through 12 educators and school personnel, including contract and temporary staff, will be eligible to receive COVID-19 vaccines in Missouri on March 15th. So that's a big jump forward, I assume, when it comes to a healthy educational infrastructure.
Yeah, we're really ahead of schedule on that, and we're so thankful for that here in this state. We're thankful that we are now second in the United States for the lowest positivity rate dealing with COVID-19. And a lot of that had to do with the balanced approach. We didn't shut our state down. We didn't do a lot of the mandates that other states did. We really had to be able to fight that COVID-19 along with keep our economy going. And education was just critical to that. Matter of fact, 95% of our schools are in classroom training as we speak now, and we're like sixth in the nation as far as getting our kids back into school. And then just really being able to deal with what we learned from a pandemic, of putting everything on the table to realize what you did right, what you did wrong, and really depend on the data, our own dashboards here in our state to really figure out how do we make adjustments to that. And I think so many of the things that we did prior to the pandemic, it seems like the pandemic leads the news all the time. But by putting workforce development in place, infrastructure in place, by working on broadband way before the pandemic had in our state was critical. Although we still we need to do more. We've got to be able to do that in our state. But all the things we prepared for that day, and when it comes to the education arena, one of the things I'm a firm believer in is early childhood development. I mean, when you want to look at the correction facilities in our states, when you want to look at healthcare, when you want to look at all the things that cost so much money, it all starts with a kid. And you got to take care of that child from an early age and make sure they have some form of education that they can get through school and get into job training. And we've really just tried to focus on that to be a priority. But you literally, as a governor, have to make it a priority. And that's what we did with infrastructure and workforce development in our place. And it's really turned out really good. And yesterday, I had a great time to visit some high schools in my state. Some of our what we call work-ready programs. We have about 12,000 students enrolled in that program this year. And these are jobs like IT, mechanics, welding, construction, all the things that they're going to need to go into the workforce when they get out of high school. And we put that plan in place several years ago, teaming up with our K through 12 schools, which we fully fund in this state, our community college, our tech schools, our training schools, and our universities. So a lot of things to do, but the whole basis of that was workforce development and infrastructure to move forward. And that's the secret to success. And I think we've been able to prove that here in the state.
Well, Governor Parson, another thing I've been kind of looking at is, okay, what's the secret sauce of some of the stuff you've been up to and, looking at this. And what I see is you've invested, your budget invests, in these innovation teams in education. Is that part of the workforce and infrastructure side? Can you take us to sort of a couple of notches further and tell us about those innovation teams and, what they've generated, what they've created?
Right. Well, we go back to work ready where these high school kids get ready to go out there. That we've teamed up with our manufacturers, our workers, our CEOs, our corporations to know when they see that certificate means something. This kid really has done something in that. I also think a program that we started a little over 2 years ago that we're just now getting the data in to see who are really effective. But we did Fast Track here in Missouri. And what that really means is if you're 25 years and older, and maybe for whatever reason you started college, you dropped out, or you got married, or you went in the workforce, and you just didn't get the training you needed, we would actually start a program that we would bring you back into a community college, a tech school, a training school, and give you the ability to up your skills. And that's a state program that we're running here. We had no idea who would take advantage of that when we started that. But the reality of it was 80% of the people that got into Fast Track were women. And the vast majority of them were in the healthcare industry. So especially in the nursing field. So when the pandemic hit, we had no idea what those numbers looked like until afterwards. But we're so thankful we started programs like that and given people the opportunity to up their skills. We recovered over 72% of our jobs in this state since the pandemic started. And not only that, we created 10,000 new jobs because of that workforce development pieces we had in there and the infrastructure, and $1 billion worth of new infrastructure, expansions of businesses here in this state, simply because we took a balanced approach and we had these things in place and we did not shut our state down. And so it's exciting for us. Things are going good. I mean, these are the good things you work hard for. And when you really get to see the results, that's what's exciting for us here in the state.
Governor, we're taking questions in the audience, but I want to squeeze in one more question to you. A lot of our focus this last year has been looking at the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on Black and brown communities. It's exacerbated economic divides, racial divides, and sometimes when you look at communities where things just aren't even, I'd like to kind of understand, as you kind of talk about the strengths in Missouri, have you been able to kind of blur some of those divides? Have you been able to end some of those divides? How, when you have approached inclusive workforce development, inclusive infrastructure, how do you see that scene of bringing everybody in under the tent?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think you got to go back pre-COVID-19 to what is the relationship you built with those communities then. And I'm going to say COVID-19, a disproportionate of the African-American community, but I would say that in healthcare in general, when it comes to providing those services and realizing we've got to do more to make sure we get those services to the neighborhoods we need to get them to where they have access to it. One, for most of us that think getting in a car and going 2 or 3 blocks is not a big deal. Some areas it is. So we got to figure out how we take those resources to them. And I think early on, I built a really good relationship with the clergy in a lot of our communities across our state, the urban leagues. We established relationships there and really just took a good, I want to say, the data approach to it and says, what is it we really can do that really moves the needle? And then how do you deliver those services? Now, if you want to get specific on COVID-19, early on, we knew that we were going to have to do something beyond the normal way that we give health care to a lot of people in our state. So when I called out the National Guard, when you hear a lot about mass vaccines, we actually did targeted vaccines where we put the National Guard members in 4-person teams where we could go in any neighborhood and we could do somewhere between 300 and 400 shots per day. But we could just literally send these units in there and target, whether it be the African-American community or just other communities of the homeless or the poverty side of it. Those are extremely successful of how you get to those resources. But I'm going to go back to what I said in the beginning. Why workforce development and infrastructure is so important. But it starts with the child. It starts with getting people educated and get them in the workforce. If not, you're trying to deal with them on the high end of healthcare, the high end of the criminal justice system. And those are the things you got to really do to move the needle in your states.
Well, Governor, we have a question for you from Gerald. Gerald?
Hi, my name's Gerald Angst. I'm a teacher at Cheltenham Elementary School in Cheltenham, Pennsylvania. And my question is, how can we rethink accountability to promote innovation and focus on expanding student potential instead of the deficit orientation we're currently operating under?
Yeah, well, I think, one, you got to analyze. You got to go back and retool what we do in education. You never take the same old for granted. And I think for us, I'll give you early childhood development here in the state of Missouri. If you look at it from the bureaucracy side, early childhood development was in 3 different departments, multiple divisions, and literally could not communicate with one another. That's government bureaucracy at its worst, to be right honest about. So we literally took a bold step and took early childhood development, put it under one umbrella, one agency, one department, one division, so we could make decisions out there, and we reevaluated that system. That model is the same model we need to use for sure through K through 12 to see what changes we need to make, what works, what don't work. And I think I've been very fortunate in this state where most people are buying into the workforce development pieces, the training pieces in K through 12. And most of the school systems are working with us. And I think realizing they got to change the way they do business. You just can't do again, you can't do the same old we've been doing if you want better results. So I think you're seeing the state pretty open to creative ideas, new ideas, and figuring out how do we deliver that education to these kids of our state.
Governor, in the American Recovery Plan, are the pieces in it that you need? Or do you have any constructive counsel for the Biden administration on any blind spots in that plan?
You know, I think the one thing, if you take a state like ours, we've been very fortunate. Financially, we're in a really good shape. We of course, we got to balance the budget every year by the Constitution here. We have a AAA bond rating, which we're only one of 6 states in the United States that has that financially. What I would really say to any administration, and whether it's the Biden administration or whether it was President Trump's administration, you know, give us the ability to invest the money at the state level. Give us the ability to make those decisions. And I guarantee you we will be much more efficient than what all the strings that are attachments on the federal government. When you try to make policy from the federal side, you got to talk about states like New York or California or Illinois, anything. It's not the same as it is in our state. And the governors need to have that flexibility to be able to do that. So my message is always, you know, make your investments. I want the president to be successful. I don't care who the president is. I'm a military guy, so the commander-in-chief is the commander-in-chief, regardless of what his last name is. But I want him to be successful. But I also need to give them the opportunity to let us do our jobs at the state level because we know how to handle these situations much better than the federal government. So we're always trying to be open to that. But, you know, we want to work with the federal government to do what's best for our state.
What service were you in, Governor?
United States Army, military police.
Okay, well, I'll let that go. I grew up as an Air Force brat and lived as a DOD dependent in a lot of places, but my dad was Air Force. But that's still cool. Well, I want to thank Governor.
Tell you, we always tried to slip into those Air Force bases to go eat because you got a lot better facilities than we had, I can tell you.
Well, thank you. Well, Missouri Governor Mike Parson, real honor to talk to you. Really enjoyed it. I hope we can continue this. I know you got a lot of issues to cover, but I could talk about early childhood development for ages, but many other issues as well. So thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it. Good luck, and so hopefully see you in person before long.
Absolutely. And now it's time to hear from some of our transformative school leaders. Juliana Urtube is the 2021 Nevada State Teacher of the Year. I just followed her on Twitter. It's so cool. She's got Nevada State Teacher of the Year up there. She's a finalist for National Teacher of the Year. She serves as an instructional strategist and co-teacher for the pre-K and special education departments at Kermit R. Booker Elementary in Westside, Las Vegas. And Dr. Michelle Reed is the superintendent of the North Shore School District, and hopefully I'm not mispronouncing this, Bothell. Is that right? Bothell?
Bothell.
Bothell. Okay, Bothell. That one I didn't give me instruction. In Washington in February, she was named the 2021 National Superintendent of the Year. So you got both ends of the spectrum here. Congratulations to both of you for joining us. Juliana, let me just start with you. So first of all, really congratulations, but how do you make it work in this time? I mean, we're all trying to find our way. I guess, I want to sort of jump forward a year and say, okay, what were the cool things we learned? What were the lessons in dealing with each other we learned? What were the devices and technologies that helped make this easier that we ought not to toss away? I'd love to get your insights into this moment and what you think has really mattered as you've done your job.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a great pride to represent the state of Nevada. How do we do this? Well, it's all about collaboration, and it's thinking really carefully about what that collaboration means. It means teachers collaborating with each other to a higher degree. That was the only way that we could manage the workload that we were all facing. It meant deeper collaborations with families. It meant involving more student choice and student voice into all of our instruction. That way we can make sure we had the highest attendance rate as possible. Students were engaging and they were learning. So I think one of the biggest shifts that I want to hold on to with all of my might moving forward, and it's so exciting to say moving forward, we're getting to that point where we're all planning for what's next. What I want to hold on to with dear life is designs like UDL, designed universal design for learning for all, meaning that we let students work at their pace. We let them reach their mastery at levels and ways that make the most sense to them. I'm a special education teacher, so it's so important to me that our students are fully included in all of the technology pieces that they have access to. And it's letting students redo assignments. It's letting them engage in assignments that mark and charge their curiosity.
But before I jump over to Michelle, can you tell us about this program, Connecting Kids Nevada?
Absolutely. It's such a bright spot in our state. Connecting Kids in Nevada is a private and public task force that brought people from all over our state together to meet the equity needs of technology for all of our students. And over the course of 4 months, they were able to provide every single student who needed it in Nevada with a Chromebook and with a Wi-Fi hotspot. The system was seamless. It was really easy for families to navigate, and it just changed the way we taught. The previous year, when COVID hit, we were doing the best that we could with whatever technology we could scramble. And moving forward in the fall, we knew that all of our students would have that technology, and it just let us formalize and make our learning way more authentic.
Wow, thank you. Dr. Reed, I know, as a superintendent, you've got a lot of folks working with you, and you basically have to look at this entire ecosystem, and that includes not just students and teachers, but parents and other partners in the community. And I also know that you've been focusing a lot on STEM and on equity and making sure we have equitable inclusion in that environment. What I guess what are the most important pieces of this that our audience should understand? Because, partly I like to make these show and tell. What can they hear from you that we might consider replicating in their communities?
Thank you, and thanks for having me. And thanks, Juliana. I think that there are some fabulous tips that she shared as well. We come from a premise that learning happens best in community. And the stronger our community and the more inclusive our community is, the more connected our community is, the more likely it is that our schools are going to be strong and reflect the best of our community. In North Shore, we have 94 home languages spoken, and so we're a very diverse community. And one of the things we've learned is that has been a powerful strength as we've navigated the last year. We've had a number of our community members connected with family around the world, so we continue to get updates on best practices from around the world. And what we realize is we don't know everything here in North Shore. And if we're going to model learning and staying in community, then we need to stay in conversation, not just with our staff internally, but with our students. I spend a lot of time, I'm in every virtual classroom by the end of the year, meeting with students, hearing their needs, meeting with parents regularly. I think the power of community has really come home during this past year. We've learned more about each other, I think, than we ever had, right? About each other's pets, our hobbies, and a variety of things. And I think that's a tenet of education, right? You have a powerful education system when students are known and seen and have a voice and feel connected. And it's important to know students and their work well for us to make the progress we need to make one at a time. And eventually that creates a powerful, positive system.
I spent a lot of time with educators in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and to be honest, the picture there is a bit more mixed. I wish it were all great, but there are some students that don't that have kind of fallen out of the picture, if you will. I talk to teachers, and they're worried about it. We have people kind of connect. One of the things that's very clear to me about both of your profiles is it's high touch, that you really work hard to get connections with the students, find out where they are, to reach them, to know them, other teachers. Is that transportable? Is that an ethic, or is that an app? Are there dimensions that those that are struggling with what you've succeeded at might learn from something? Juliana?
I definitely think that we can use technology to enhance it, but it comes with first our teaching philosophies, our philosophies of how we learn and why we learn. And if we can all come to the agreement that how we learn is through each other. Like Michelle just pointed out, it's all about our students being able to connect to themselves, to their communities and families, and to their world. And so it really means educators coming together to have a philosophy that puts people first, that's human first, that's community first. And so teachers need to continue to spend a good amount of time and energy into getting to know our students, understanding their many layers of identities, how those identities show, how those identities shifts, and then designing our instruction based on that knowledge, making sure that we have a lot of room for input from families and communities, that we understand students' social political frameworks, their historical lineage. All of that contributes into really being able to create this classroom and school bond that will allow us to endure a crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic. And we can enhance it through technology, but at the heart and center is people and the love that we have for each other and for learning.
Thank you. Michelle, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with Juliana. And I would also say that because we've been in this pandemic morass, honestly, for now just over a year, I think we've forgotten that we had these inequities before the pandemic.
Of course.
And the systemic structures that did not support all children before cannot be the structures we return to when we return to our school buildings in a more traditional space and routine. We've talked a lot in North Shore about opening the schools of the future and not the schools of the past. It's very important that we shed some of our structural practices that have had children not be seen, connected, or heard prior to the pandemic. I think the pandemic has really just revealed into everyone, right, some of the huge inequities that have been there for many, many years. And I think I think it's heightened our resolve to address them.
This is a terrific conversation. We have a quick question for you from Karen Howard. Karen?
Hello, I'm Karen Howard, Director of Policy and Advocacy at Mental Health America. In 2020, over 2.5 million people came to MHA's website to take a mental health screening. 42% of those screeners were between the ages of 11 and 17 years old, and that age group was the most likely to score with severe to moderate anxiety and depression. Suicide also continues to be the second leading cause of death for youth ages 10 to 24 years old. As schools reopen, how are systems planning to meet the emotional and mental health needs of students experiencing anxiousness, depression, and suicidality?
Thanks, Karen. Very sobering question. Juliana, your thoughts on the mental health agenda that we need to consider?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that all schools should be able to say is that they have both a counselor and a social worker in addition to the psychologist. We know that in years past with budget cuts, those are usually some of the first areas where those positions get cut. And teachers need the support of counselors and social workers to provide wraparound services to our students. Teachers also need to continue to be able to not only learn about social and emotional learning for students, but for themselves too. It starts with us. It starts with how we model managing our own emotions, our own frustrations, how we embrace failure and mistakes as an opportunity to learn, how we model to our students self-love and connectivity. We know that when students are connected to other students and they get to do this through meaningful play, something which I really hope that when we go back, when everybody goes back into the physical buildings, we incorporate way more play, because play not only is great for our students for their physical health, but it's great for their emotional health. And also that we design learning that mirrors our students' cultural, linguistic gifts, that our students can see themselves how they connect to their community. These ideas have great impact on what our students can do in terms of their self-worth. When we really help our students by showing them how we see them as wonderful, capable, creative people, then they'll be able to lean into that a little bit more. And for the students who that's not quite enough, we need tangible, people power. We need all sorts of services to wrap around.
Thank you. Dr. Reed, your quick thoughts?
My quick thoughts would be it's really important for us to utilize research-based trauma-informed practices as we're bringing students back to campus, and really take the time necessary to authentically listen to the concerns and address those. I would also say, just as a FYI, that mental health has been in pandemic proportions for several years as well. And I honestly think, No Child Left Behind was initiated in 2001 with all of the standardized testing and all of the accoutrements that come with all of that. And it's been a generation of students, 18 years, a generation of students who have gone through school with a very narrowed curriculum in many places, elimination of opportunities in the arts and hands-on learning and opportunities to be creative and thoughtful and collaborative as we have this rush to standards, right? And what parent wants to put that I have a standard child on the refrigerator? No one's looking for that, right? So I think we really need to think both in the moment and apply trauma-informed practices as we greet children and families returning to schools. And we really need to think about what are the courses and what is the education we're providing that enables that confident, creative thinker that we're going to need in this world yet to be imagined.
Look, I am so glad that somebody found both of you, Dr. Michelle Reed, the 2021 National Superintendent of the Year, Juliana Urtube, the 2021 Nevada Teacher of the Year. Sometimes I'm very skeptical if people go get awards, but I could tell why you deserve those awards. I hope you do lots of show and tell about the various important steps you're taking, to basically take care of the child where the child is. Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us today.
Thank you.
And now for a message from one of our sponsors, the American Federation of Teachers.
My union has been trying to reopen schools since last April. We know how important in-school learning is, but we had a president who refused to collect data, give us the guidance that the CDC has just given us, and given us the resources.
There's simply nothing more important than us getting the resources we need to vaccinate the people in this country.
The Biden administration has been a sea change. Within 3 weeks, they've gotten us guidance that we can use, and then hopefully we will get this rescue bill that he's trying to pass out of the Congress, plus prioritizing teachers for vaccines like other essential workers.
And I think between the CDC guidance as well as the resources that President Biden is trying to get in the $1.9 trillion package, we have the highway or the roadmap.
Jeffrey Canada is the president of Harlem Children's Zone, an organization that seeks to build opportunities for children, family, and communities. Jeffrey's been named to the Time 100 list of most influential leaders across the world. He's been featured in a number of documentaries, TV programs, podcasts for his knowledge of comprehensive educational programming and community development. This is not a guy who just thinks inertia works. He's a change maker. Jeffrey, it's great to see you again. It's been a long time. Let me just ask you, I'm going to get off my script here for a moment. Look, our country, our communities are having a hard time. There may be another side to this thing. And I think, I know you take children's education and where they're at more seriously than almost anyone else I know. Do you worry that we're just going to bounce back to old patterns and not have learned the things we've learned from this moment. What are your thoughts?
I mean, it is my biggest fear. I've been like yelling from the rooftops. We've been so desperate to get our schools open, to get ourselves vaccinated, to get our lives back to normal, that I can just hear the sigh of relief. Oh my God, thank goodness the schools are open. We're good. And we are going to be anything but good. And I just have to say, I've been an educator for 45 years, started teaching 45 years ago in Massachusetts. And I've been through some real education ups and downs. I was in Boston during busing, and I saw that horrible impact on communities of color, saw that city ripped apart, came back to New York during this whole focus on criminal justice, the crime bill, super predators, that whole thing that was just horrible for communities of color, and certainly went through sort of the Ed Wars, Leave No Child Behind, Race to the Top, all of those things. But I will tell you, I have not seen anything even coming close to what we're going to be facing today because of COVID-19, because of not just the educational challenges of huge numbers of kids missing schools, especially the poorest kids, the trauma that people are talking about that these kids are going to go through, but also because women have lost their jobs, particularly women of color have lost their jobs. People are worried about where they're going to live. We already had a crisis before this crisis. And if anybody thinks, we have to get back to the good old days, we're going to undermine the future of America. This is an all hands on deck. This is break the glass time. We've got to go and make sure that we put in place a strategy. And by the way, it's not going to be like a 6-month strategy or a year strategy. We're going to have a multi-year, we need to think 5 years to really make sure all of the gains our children lost, we've recovered those, and that kids who are at the closest end, those who are in high school, that we really make sure those young people get a chance to catch up on what they've missed during this year.
Jeffrey, I know you're friends with Randy Weingarten, who was on the show earlier, and Randy and I for years have talked about civitas, the civic engagement, the understanding, the empathy across lines in society that kind of holds it together. But if the truth is told, there was a big chunk of American society that was neglected in our civic experiment in the past. And I think, one of the interesting elements is, what are the models to break through that now? To one, solve many of the challenges that you were addressing. But I know that community schools is something, a different model of education working on. And I want to ask you both to help share with our audience what makes a community school, what makes it work, but also how does it address this civitas that we need to have in our society of restoring mutual concern for everyone?
So, this is, Randy and I have really been pushing to expand what's considered sort of the traditional aspects of education outside of just the traditional school walls, teacher, student, desk lined up, thinking more about how we serve the whole child and his or her family in ways that begin to rebuild these bonds of community. Look, there are huge swaths of this country that have felt totally ignored. They felt that their children don't have a chance, that their communities and schools aren't working for them, and no one's coming to rescue them. I think, the community schools, business folks know us because of Promise Neighborhoods and this sort of cradle to career strategy we have. But we started before we got to our Harlem Children's Own strategy. We started with Beacon schools in New York City. And what were they? They were a school that served the entire neighborhood, trying to and serve kids from kindergarten straight through till college, trying to meet the needs of that community's kids. So if kids needed additional help in the arts, it was like, great, let's give them arts. if they needed more in terms of civic involvement because they felt cut off from the body politic, we actually helped them figure out how do you begin to advocate for yourself and for your community. If they needed help in traditional subjects of reading, math, social studies, science, we provided those instructions. This idea was that the school day didn't start and end simply when that school bell rang. But we ran that program till 10 o'clock at night when we'd have the high school kids there. So we would keep them off the streets and engaged and under the watchful eye of caring adults, teaching them a set of skills that was going to help them navigate a world that many of them had not been introduced to. So if you hadn't been used to going outside of your 30 block area, you've never been to a Broadway play or visited a college campus and didn't know what the insides of a corporate building looked like. We were trying to open up the young person's imagination so that they could begin to see not only that these things existed, but there was a path for them to get from where they were to be comfortable in all of those surroundings. So to me, part of what we have to do is to make sure that we are reaching out to young people and giving them the kind of power and skills they need to become advocates for themselves, their families, and their communities. And we have seen what young people can do when it comes to activism. We saw that around global warming and young people taking the lead. We saw a lot of that around the George Floyd and Black Lives Matter movement in this country. And we think that part of what we have to teach our young people is how to be much more engaged in the body politic. Because the truth be told, when you look at what has moved this country, you look at the civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, young people were at the center of each one of those movements. And we have to make sure that they're being prepared today. And I don't see a better way than thinking about how we use school buildings to serve the community. That's a community school. How do we serve the community? And let me tell you why that school building is so important. It is usually the only place in poor communities that you can get hundreds of people in all the time. And it's built to be almost indestructible. So you don't have to worry that kids are going to be kids and they're going to throw the ball off the wall and the rest of the stuff that kids do. That's why these institutions should be serving a larger purpose than just the kids who are inside that school building from 8 to 2 or 9 to 3 or whatever the school day is.
I love the concept, Jeffrey, because it delivers in 3D form the notion that education is so much more than, you know, a child at a desk in a building with a single teacher. There are lots of other dimensions to this. Have you been able to keep the model going in an online form during this time?
Yeah, well, you know, interestingly enough, I personally have believed that technology, ed tech, is the wave of the future, even though I didn't think it was very good where it is right now. And one of the reasons is that there is no substituting a great teacher. I mean, all of us who've had a great teacher, we know the difference between great and mediocre. Part of what I am hoping is that we can find great teaching and capture it and put it online and let lots of other young people who need additional great teaching after school, weekends, holidays, summertime, actually get that great teaching. So we were already thinking about how to use online products before we had to go virtual when they closed the schools. And unlike a lot of places, we decided we were going to teach. Our school day goes from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we decided we were going to teach from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we were going to teach all subjects. So we were going to teach gym, and we were going to teach dance, and we were going to teach drawing. We're going to do all of those things remotely. And of course, you know, there's not a handbook on this stuff. So we were trying to figure a lot of this out online. But the one thing that we found is that young people desperately need to feel like they're in a relationship with their teacher. You know, when you think about it, up until I got to be about 13 or 14, the teacher was the smartest person I knew. I believed everything that teacher told me. They were so important in my life to tell me what I should be concerned about, what I needed to know and why. And suddenly you remove that person from a child's life in real time, that's going to have a dramatic impact on that child. And so, it's one of the reasons Randy and I have been trying to push as hard as possible to get our schools reopened all over, and because there's no substituting for a live person. You can drill skills and other things using technology, but that personal warmth, and I don't know whether you've had a teacher that you really thought really liked you, thought you were special. I mean, it changes your whole way of thinking about yourself. And great teachers make all the kids feel that way instead of just you.
I opened this show earlier today, Jeffrey, with a tribute to my high school teacher, Cindy Goodwin. She was my high school writing and literature teacher. She just passed, and I made the decision, it was COVID safe, to go to her memorial service in Texas, where she passed. And she had 140 or so students from different generations over decades who came in. And it just sort of said, wow, she made that impact on all of these lives. And in this time, COVID safe, they wanted to pay tribute to her. You can see the line. So, I mean, I totally know what you're saying. Look, I've got a Not Arga wall and others coming on, edX. I'm going to tell him, hey, he should, connect with you and, find those great teachers, put it online. But let me just ask you really quickly, Jeffrey, one thing you said, which is kind of haunting me at the moment, which are those students that have been impacted right now. What are your insights on how we can help them? Because, their educational experience has been damaged. They're going to be set behind others. I'd like to know from you, if you were to do 2 or 3 things that we ought to begin thinking about in addressing that time so that they're not pushed under the rug and forgotten and marginalized, what would you recommend to our viewers?
Well, the first thing is that young people are going to be worried about not just what happened, but will it happen again? When will it happen? Does this mean that when the little boy next to me has a cold and a sneezed on me, am I now going to infect other people? So what this says to me is that we have to give kids real knowledge, real facts and real information. Often people talk to kids like, they can't understand, like they won't really get it. Kids need to get this. They need to understand what happened. They need to understand how we fixed it, why we fixed it, and why they should feel confident now that we'll be prepared if it ever happens again. So that's one issue. But here's the other thing I think. We've never had in this country an incident that has impacted every single child in America. I don't care where you are. If you're in Appalachia, the same challenges. If you're on the West Coast, the East Coast, if you're a middle-class kid, you're in private school, all the kids were bombarded with a crisis that is terrifying. You might die. The air you breathe might kill you. So what does this mean? That means that we need to scale the kinds of emotional and social supports for young people so that they can begin to process this. It's not going to happen in a week or a month. This is going to take time. But you know what I think? I don't know if you remember when New York City was at the height of the epidemic and our hospitals were filled, overflowing. We couldn't find enough nurses and doctors. They actually allowed students in medical school who were due to graduate in June, they allowed them to come out of school, to come to the hospitals, and that would count as their classwork, and they would get their diplomas and get their medical licenses. We need to do that with social workers. We need to do that with psychology, master's degree students. We need to bring and bombard our schools with people who have been trained to listen, to support, to help guide children. So even as we're thinking about how we deal with the educational challenges, we've got people thinking about the social, emotional health of our young people. And then look, some people are going to think this is bad news, but we've got to think about at least an 11-month school year. There's just no way that we're going to be able to close school for the entire summer and catch poor children up. It's just not possible. I don't know any way we're going to do it. We're going to have to think about how we use time differently. We're going to think about the outside resources we need to bring into schools. We have to think about high intensity tutoring to make sure young people are getting small group and one-to-one instruction that helps them catch up. And we have to think about doing this for the next 3 to 5 years if we're going to be serious about not building in the next generation social and educational inequality in this country.
Well, for everybody watching, I love big ideas. What you just heard was a very big idea. 11-month education, high-intensity tutoring, 3 to 5 year focus, and more. And I would call this, as I would do when we were like in a brick and mortar, that's a tweetable moment. And Dr. Jeffrey Canada, president of the Harlem Children's Zone, it's such an honor to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing these big thoughts with us today.
Thank you for caring so much about this issue and staying on top of it.
Thank you, sir. We now turn again to higher ed for a discussion on how to reimagine our current university model and make it more accessible. Joining me now are two experts on the subject. They're beyond experts. They're it. Anant Agarwal is the founder and CEO of edX, an online learning platform that offers more than 3,000 online courses from universities like MIT and Harvard. He's also a professor of electrical engineering and computer science at MIT. And Mamie Voigt is the interim president of the Institute for Higher Education. She focuses on affordability, transparency, and the importance of post-secondary data policy in achieving education equity. Anant, it's great to see you again, my friend, and it's been a while. We're sitting here in a pandemic. I mean, I always thought when we met and talked many years ago, when I was at another publication, that you were the future, that everything you were like. Now we have a pandemic, and folks need edX more than ever. What have you learned in this time of crisis? And I just want to, just throw one other element there. Are you finding the hunger for your online courses as great in the United States as I know it is tsunami-like from abroad?
The hunger for education, and particularly online education, has taken on, I love your term, tsunami proportions. I'm going to use that. And by the way, great to see you again. It was amazing. In March of last year, when the pandemic truly came and hit our shores, the interest in online learning went exponential. We had a 10-fold increase in the number of people registering on edX than just a month before. And we've seen courses and programs that were popular before, like computer science, business, and data science, as well as topics like pandemics and Ebola. Of course, how to use ventilators. Just an amazing interest in all kinds of courses during this time, and from students all over the world, whether it was the US or India or Africa or Australia, an exponential increase in interest during all of this time. And people were particularly looking for short courses and certifications from top institutions that they could use to bolster their resumes, either because they were looking to upskill in their current jobs or because they had been furloughed or laid off and they wanted to come out stronger following the pandemic.
Anant, you just heard Jeffrey. I don't know if you heard Jeffrey Canada. He's an incredibly fascinating, innovative education, different level of the education spectrum than you are. And he just said, he just described sort of what he hoped we would need: great teachers, scale, online. He described your company, but the other end. Do you have any interest in expanding into Jeffrey Canada land?
Jeffrey and I have been on panels together before. And we need to be careful about one thing, though. Oftentimes, first of all, we want to expand and collaborate, and Jeffrey Canada's work is absolutely amazing. At the same time, we need to recognize that people often mistake online learning for learning that does not involve great teachers and interaction with great teachers.
Right.
Our youths today, whether they are coming out of the cradle or going into careers, are very excited about online and all things digital. In fact, my daughter, I saw her watching a video one day on her iPhone, and I asked her, "What are you watching?" And it turned out that she was watching the Green Brothers. This is Hank and John Green, who are icons, and they teach all kinds of cool things. And frankly, few adults know who they are, but every kid does. But these are all online personalities, and I think great teachers, great teaching, great enthusiasm, excitement, motivation, all of this can be conveyed online as easily as it can be conveyed in person. And frankly, the beauty of online is that it increases access dramatically. How many people have a chance to go to an online show at a concert by the Green Brothers. But online, tens and hundreds of millions of people can have access. And I think in the same way with education, we can do the same using ed tech, digital technology, to make education, whether high school level or college level, or for employees at companies, available to people all over the world to improve in their careers, to upskill, reskill for the future of work.
Thank you. Mamie, I know that you work in the, you work with data. I love people who work with data because, one of the challenges in this business, in media covering, is we're always looking for that unique boutique story, right, of somebody, and sometimes we make assumptions on causality we shouldn't make. Sometimes we presume things we shouldn't presume. Data are very much the answer when it comes to policy, and I'm interested in, how we move from these boutique feel-good stories or feel-bad stories to something where we're going to get smarter by understanding the habits, the norm, the promising practices in education, particularly post-secondary education, that you think matter most because that's where the data takes us. Is that an okay on-ramp into this?
Absolutely. And the issues that you raise around data are really key to understanding the issue of how to deal with the current pandemic and the ways that it's really upended our higher education system. And I think it helps to get to some of the issues that Anant is raising as well about, pairing quality, good teaching with various different types of modalities for getting the information to students so that they can engage thoughtfully with it. This all ties into a conversation around the value of post-secondary education. And this is something that folks were talking about before the pandemic. Issues of post-secondary value, polling routinely shows that issues of college affordability and student debt are top concerns for the American public. And the pandemic has really just deepened the focus on these questions around value because of how the shift has happened so rapidly to online learning, in not always the ways with the ability to build in that thoughtful pedagogies into the delivery of the materials. And so we see that the pandemic is making these questions all the more pressing, especially for Black, Latinx, Indigenous students, underrepresented Asian and Pacific Islander students, and students from low-income backgrounds, and women, all of whom have been disproportionately impacted by the upheaval that the pandemic has caused from an economic standpoint, from a social standpoint, from an educational standpoint. And so, you talk about the data and the evidence, and what the evidence shows is that the returns to post-secondary education are real, they are measurable, they are substantial. That when individuals and when society invest in post-secondary education, they realize real returns to that post-secondary education in terms of economic mobility. However, we also see that value depends all too much on a person's race, ethnicity, income, and gender, and it absolutely shouldn't. And the pandemic is deepening these inequities that we already see within our higher education system in a number of ways. For one, when we look at the data, we see that enrollments for next year, applications and financial aid applications for college next fall, while they're up at some of the most selective colleges, they're down for less selective institutions. They're down for first-generation college goers and for low-income students. For example, we've seen that at the State University System of New York, they've had a 20% decline in applications for next year. And so this is a real signal to how students are navigating this question of post-secondary value during the time of online learning. We've seen similar results in the data when looking at FAFSA applications, so new applicants for federal financial aid, and see that they're down across the board by 10%. And the largest declines are among Title I schools and schools with high proportions of students of color. And so while we imagine that the surge of ed tech and the surge of online opportunities will help to open doors to more students, it's not doing that right now. And it can only do that if we're really deliberate about questions of equity, especially in making sure that students have equitable access to broadband and to the technology that they need to be able to access the coursework. making sure that people have a quiet place to study and to complete their coursework, which is especially difficult now when we're quarantining at home with our families.
Right.
And then low-income folks and people of color have been disproportionately harmed by the economic impacts of the pandemic, making it all the more difficult to afford a post-secondary education.
I love that two of you are paired together, because maybe when I hear from you about what some of the data are saying about the impact of the pandemic on various groups, here I say to myself, the answer is edX, right? I'm wondering in terms of disruption in Anand, I think the last time I interviewed you, I didn't mention this, but I had dinner. I won't mention the university because I don't want to get blocked from campus, but very prominent president of university who basically said, we're not going to change. I asked him, I said, what kinds of disruptions are coming? He said, we're going to keep doing what we've been doing the way we've been doing it. It was a very kind of flat earth response, I thought, to my question about what kinds of things were going to come and challenge university before the pandemic. And now when I kind of look at the disruptions that are coming and sort of asking, what are the great platforms out there? It looks like edX-like platforms or 2U-like platforms, are clearly part of that. But Anand, how do you look at, you're at MIT, and so you look at a large-scale, kind of expensive, high-octane, high-end university, but there's a very rich educational establishment. When you listen to Mamie and when she's sort of looking at how certain communities have been negatively impacted and how the value equation is being rethought. What are your thoughts on how you can bridge what Mamie is seeing in her data and how we can still deliver an inclusive educational outcome in the end without necessarily having everybody go to MIT?
It's not, these are not two extremes, but, high quality education at a top university or a broad education to a large number of people online can really work together very closely. We have 37 million learners learning on edX. And universities like MIT and Harvard and Berkeley and Oxford and Cambridge and companies like Google and Amazon are offering courses and learnings on edX. And these are all top-notch, high-quality education. And frankly, even on campuses, students are using online learning materials in their day-to-day studies. And this is not just during the pandemic. I'll give you a number. At MIT, for instance, well before the pandemic, 99% of undergraduates were using the edX platform in their learning on campus as part of the normal education. And of course, when the pandemic hit, everything went on high octane. It was as if we turbocharged the whole online effort, where faculty and students from being in the minority in terms of using online learning routinely went to using online learning 100%. And even many of my colleagues who were very reticent before about online learning have now become familiar with online learning, both students and faculty. And because of that, by and large, there's more familiarity. And to all of us, once we get more familiar, we also get more comfortable with pretty much anything, particularly technology. And so what COVID has done is that it has forced everybody to become comfortable with digital technology and online learning. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a new normal, where the new normal for education, even on campuses, is going to be blended. I predict that over the next 3 years, for example, I wouldn't be surprised if about half the learning on campus became online and about half became in person, where we really had a future, a blended learning future in colleges. And many studies have shown that blended learning, research has shown, data has shown, our own data and that of others, that blended learning, where you combine the best of in-person and online, is better than purely in-person or purely online. And I think that is the future.
Appreciate it. Maybe just last a question for you. I'm just wondering if you have any from the data and the world you're in. It's at the Institute for Higher Educational Policy, whether or not you folks have cracked the code on continual education and retraining. One of the things we've seen with the impact that technology has on any economy is it creates displacement. One of the things I think we have not been great at is helping to, one, destigmatize those changes and disruptions in people's work and giving them healthy and real opportunities in educational experience and a different kind of credentialing that's positive. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I don't know if I'm framing it right, but I know that that's one of this country's biggest challenges. And as you talked about value, as you talked about these different dimensions, I'm wondering if you have any insights from a policy perspective of how we need to begin thinking about that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the point here of disruption and this being a moment of disruption is exactly right. And it ties into this point around credentialing. And I think that raises many of these equity considerations as well in terms of value. One of the most important aspects that we'll need to keep an eye on as a policy community, as practitioners, as we continue this shift towards online learning and continue the work past this moment of disruption, is to ensure that the value really is accruing equitably to students across race, income, and gender lines. You mentioned earlier a conversation with a college president who said that we're not going to change. I would suppose that's probably a pretty selective institution that enrolls many white students, many non-low income students. And so if that's the pathway that some in this country have access to, while we then have different pathways for Black or Latinx students, for Indigenous students, or for students from low-income backgrounds, that translates into enormous gaps in terms of the economic mobility that we can see within society and the economic returns to a post-secondary credential. And so I think we need to ensure from a policy standpoint that the various avenues are open equitably to people and that we're not seeing increased stratification within our system as a result.
Phil, if I might add very quickly, to your point about lifelong continuous learning and credentialing, I think in terms of policy and credentialing, I think radical new modular credentials are critical. So as an example, working with our university partners, edX has launched credentials like microbachelors and micromasters. And just like the name implies, these are small modular credentials that give you a piece of a degree, where in the future, getting a full degree may not be as important as getting a piece of a degree and maybe stacking up these pieces with credentials along the way so that you could learn, let's say for 6 months, get a microbachelor's and then go and get a job. And then while you're working, you could be continuously learning additional microbachelors or micromasters and stacking them up and eventually getting a full degree. And today, our whole system is so antediluvian, it boggles my mind. What system do you know where if you work for 2 years as opposed to 4 years and then you leave, you are called a dropout? Why don't we give people a credential for a piece of work so that they can go and get a job? But our system needs so much work, and I think this idea of modular credentials will enable this continuous lifelong learning where people can upskill and earn credentials like micromasters to showcase on the resume, on the LinkedIn profiles, get promotions, and continue their studies and learning throughout life.
And I'll tell both of you, you have an open invitation to come in and talk about it. I just find it so such a positive take on how to move from something that's sort of one and done to something that we're going to have to do. We're going to have to get there, at some level. But Anant Agarwal, founder and CEO of edX, Mamie Voigt, interim president, Institute for Higher Education Policy. I love this conversation. Thank you so much. I hope you'll both be back. Really enjoyed it. And Anant, congratulations on all the things you continue to do. And look forward to having you both back to discuss this. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mamie and Phil. Bye-bye.
In 2017, Caitlin Gooch, who calls herself the Black Cowgirl, noticed the low literacy rates in North Carolina. So she partnered with a local library to promote reading skills in young children. As a prize for reading, students received a day at her father's horse farm. It turned out to be a great success, which led to the founding of her nonprofit in 2019. Since then, called Saddle Up and Read, has offered children a chance to read to and mingle with horses, creating a whole new fun learning environment, something that's become even more precious for young children as they've grappled with a pandemic. Caitlin Gooch, welcome. First question I have is can I sign up? It looks
absolutely.
It looks so cool. I mean, it's just so. You tell the story. How did this start? How did you connect your love of horses to reading and kids' educational experiences?
Yeah, and first, thank you so much for having me on. In 2017, I had spent some time working with children, maybe about 6 to 10 years at that point. And I noticed that no matter what city I was in, there was always some sort of negative connotation the kids were putting with reading or doing their spelling words. And I spent some time actually researching the literacy rates in my area within like a 10-mile radius. And what I noticed that at every school, whether it was elementary, middle, or high school, Black children were behind when it came to literacy and reading in general. And I just thought, you know what? The kids that I work with, they seem to really love looking at the pictures and the videos of my horses on my phone. So what if I can use that as an incentive to get them to read and also get them excited about reading?
Have you, I mean, look, I don't know what happened, in December 2020, Oprah Winfrey, let me just read this to folks. Oprah Winfrey tweeted, "I'll retweet to help to get the word out and donate to your nonprofit. Saddle up and read. I think what you're doing is great. Getting kids to fall in love with reading and horses. We'll call with details. Happy birthday, Gooch." It's from Oprah Winfrey. And you just wrote, "I'm not even going to pretend like I didn't just pass out." I think the most important thing, it's great what you're doing, but I'll go back to the last conversation I had. Are you finding people calling you and looking at what you're doing and saying, wow, I can replicate some dimensions of that somewhere? I mean, what you're doing is so unique. I'm just interested in whether you're finding other people saying, wow, what Caitlin Gooch has done, so powerful, let's do it in Arizona. Let's do it in Chicago. I mean, are you finding that your show and tell is influencing others?
Absolutely. I have received requests from people in Alaska, people in California, all over, even South Africa. And it's really inspiring and motivating because I've been doing this, like you introduced in the beginning, since 2017. And people are noticing like, okay, you know what? I do have horses. I know someone who has horses. Maybe we can do this. Or if they don't have horses, they know how to get like stuffed animals and stuff, and they can get creative. So I've been trying to get back with those people because they also asked for like a layout. And this really was something that came up, overnight. And then for people to ask, can you help me start this? I absolutely want to, but I want to do it in the best way possible, especially for those who might not have the resources that I have just ran into now. And Saddle Up and Read is a 501c3 in North Carolina. So I can help everybody in North Carolina, but in the other states, it's going to take us some time. But there are people who are reaching out, and I can't wait to see this duplicated in different places.
One of the other things you've done, Caitlin, which I haven't seen it yet, I want to, you've released it's called the Color and Learn Black Equestrian Coloring Book, and it features 12 Black trailblazers. I was talking last week to Lonnie Bunch, who's the president of the Smithsonian. He created the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and there's so much in that museum that I didn't know. But part of it is, raising history, kind of broadening the aperture of our understanding of our history, our culture, which includes communities, the Black community. And so I'm interested in the 12 Black Trailblazers, and I'm interested in what the response is. I mean, because it's fun for children to find heroes in their past. How's the response been? How did you come up with this?
Well, since I was 3 years old, I've been riding horses, and I was very fortunate to have grew up in a community of Black equestrians. And as an adult, I have met other Black equestrians who have never ridden a horse alongside another Black person. And so when I went out and read books and, just communicated and did all that with daycares and schools, I thought it would be a good thing to do something different for Black History Month, because we talk about the same people every year. And I really wanted to show that history because I didn't have that when I was younger. I'm just now learning about these people. And so with the coloring book, there are 12 trailblazers. I have read up on their stories. I have books about them. And I really thought that if I can put this in a coloring book and put it in simple text for kids to understand, they can research this stuff with their parents, but also it'll be something that is a lot easier to digest, because when we go to find the books about these Black cowboys and cowgirls, oftentimes the textbooks are like this thick and they're made from colleges and universities. No child is going to sit there and read that. So I thought a coloring book would be a great way to make it fun and to add something to, diversify coloring books. I didn't grow up having coloring books with characters that had like afros or hair like mine that I could just color in.
You know, it's fascinating to think. And then, you know, just finally, Caitlin, when you kind of look at how you're reaching kids, you're really getting them out of their space. So they're getting off, you know, just what they did yesterday, they're going to do a little bit tomorrow. I mean, you're getting them out of their space. It's such a valuable lesson, I think, about education, you know, in general, about getting people out of automatic pilot so that they wake up and, you know, look at the world a little differently. Since you started this in 2017, so it's been a blur for me this last year, so we're like 4 years ahead. Have you remained in touch with some of those students that you had early on? Have you seen, has their engagement with education continued even though they may have graduated from Saddle Up and Read?
Yes, so in one of the very first programs that we had, which was partnered with the local library, the kids came in, they checked out 3 or more books, their name was entered into a drawing. And one of the kids that had entered, it was her very first time that year. And she actually started taking horseback riding lessons with me. And she has been phenomenal. Her parents are great and they advocate reading. And I know like they always just say thank you because when she comes out to the farm, she's completely herself. We talk about all her dreams and we talk about the books that she reads and stuff. And then I have another kid that has grown so much. Even her mother will tell you that her confidence has just boosted by reading to horses. And it's so interesting because she will also tell you that she didn't feel that great about reading out loud in her classroom. So all of that has changed within 2 years for her. And it's just because we just allow them to be with the horses, be themselves. There's plenty of room to make mistakes. Horses, you know, they're not going to judge. They're not going to say anything. They're not going to make any sort of negative remarks. And neither are we, because we really want children to fall in love with reading.
I just love that comment. Horses aren't going to judge. They're not going to. Well, Caitlin Gooch, founder of Saddle Up and Read, it's an honor to talk to you. I'm so happy we had you in today's program. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that brings us to the end of our program today. What a powerful set of conversations. A big thank you to Nokia and the American Federation of Teachers for their support and to all of you attendees. For those of you who missed any of the conversations this afternoon, we're going to have all of this video up on our website shortly. I'm Steve Clemens. Be well.